is the book club for kids.
The book club for kids.
It's the book club for kids.
It's the book club for kids podcast.
Hi, I'm Kitty Faldy. Do you see colors when you do math problems? The heroine of our book does.
Mrs. Lowe put her hands on her hips. I've had enough of this. For the last time, numbers do not have colors. Now, are you going to complete the assignment?
That's our celebrity reader, journalist Claudia Pasuta. The book is A Mango-Shaped Space by Wendy Mass. Wendy says the idea of writing about synesthesia hit her at her local library.
I was walking through the stacks and a book literally fell off the shelf and hit me on the leg.
Our group of readers are all members of a mother-daughter book club at One More Page bookstore. They say the cat in this particular story is very unusual.
At her grandfather's funeral, that was when the cat appeared. So she had sort of thought of him as her grandfather's soul was in the cat. And so she had a special connection to him.
This is the Book Club for Kids, the show where kids talk about books. We'll tell you how you could be on the show a little later on, but first, let's meet our readers. Hannah, Rachel, Sydney, Karina, Annalise, Eva, Juliana, and Ellie.
It's about a girl who has synesthesia, which means she can see numbers and letters have colors to her.
Whenever she reads a book, she would see the letters A in yellow, and when a door would close, she would see brown rings around the door to mark the sound.
Talk a little bit about how she figures out that not everybody sees pictures like she does, colors and shapes, things like that.
When she was 8 or so, she was at school doing a multiplication problem, and she was trying stall her time because she didn't know how to do it, and she saw colored chalk.
Our celebrity reader, Claudia Pasuta, picks up the story from there, reading from the first chapter of A Mango-Shaped Space.
My mission was to multiply 24 times 9. I remember thinking that if I wrote slowly enough, the bell might ring before I could finish. Just 5 more minutes. Then no one would know that I couldn't solve the problem. I rolled the smooth piece of chalk around my fingers and tried not to think about the whole class staring at my back. Glancing around in what I hoped looked like intense concentration, I noticed a few fragments of colored chalk on the ledge of the board. To use up some time, I put down the white piece and began rewriting each number on the board in its correct color. Mia! My teacher, Mrs. Lowe, startled me. As I turned, the chalk screeched on the board, and a deep red zigzag shape sped across my field of vision. My classmates groaned at the noise. "This isn't art class," she said, wagging her long, skinny finger at me as if I didn't know that. "Just use the white chalk." "But isn't it better to use the right colors?" I asked, confident that the other kids would agree. The class giggled and I grinned, thinking that they were laughing at her, not me. "What do you mean the right colors?" she asked, sounding genuinely confused and more than a little annoyed. Now I became confused. Wasn't it obvious what I meant? I looked at my classmates for help, but now their expressions had changed. They gawked at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted another head. My hands started to shake a little, and I rushed out my explanation. The colors of the numbers, the 2 is pink. Well, of course, it's not really this shade of pink, more like cotton candy pink, and the 4 is this baby blanket blue color, and I just figured it would be easier to do the math problem with the numbers in the correct colors, right? I pleaded with my classmates, my friends, to back me up. This time when the class laughed, it didn't sound so friendly. I felt my cheeks burning. Then I heard it, in a loud whisper from the back row. "Freak!" Except it sounded like, "Freak!" "What are you talking about, Mia?" demanded my now clearly irate teacher. "Numbers don't have colors. They simply have a shape and a numerical value, that's all." "But they have all those things," I whispered, my voice sounding far away. Mrs. Lowe put her hands on her hips. "I've had enough of this. For the last time, numbers do not have colors. Now, are you going to complete the assignment?" I stared at her and shook my head. I suddenly felt very small, as if my skin was tightening and I was actually shrinking. A whirring sound filled my head. How is this possible? Was everyone playing a trick on me? Of course numbers had colors. Were they also going to tell me that letters and sounds didn't have colors? That the letter A wasn't yellow like a faded sunflower, and screeching chalk didn't make red jagged lines in the air? Was I the only one who lived in a world full of color? I waited to see if they were going to tell me the earth was flat.
That's LA radio reporter Claudia Pescuda from KNX. Of course, the book is about more than just Mia's synesthesia. It's also about her mango-colored cat.
She has a cat, and the cat's in the book. She sees like a mango-y color in his purrs and his yowls and wheezes and whatever the sounds he makes.
And what about that cat?
Well, at her grandfather's funeral, that was when the cat appeared. So she had sort of thought of him as like her grandfather's soul was in the cat. And so she had a special connection to him. But he wheezed, and so that was like a main part of why she was so attached to him, because they both were kind of different, and she found that really touching.
That cat sort of has bad news written all over it from the very beginning. Did you notice at all that it was kind of, you knew, tell me what you read.
Like, I just remember at the beginning, like, you said that he was sick ever since you got him, and the doctor said that he would get better in a couple of weeks, but it's been going on for, like, years. And I just knew that wasn't really a good sign.
So you weren't surprised when the poor cat bit the dust?
Well, I was surprised. I just didn't know when in the book, but I thought it might happen. But it was, like, really detailed, which made it really sad.
So the book talks a little bit about grief. I mean, not just about the loss of the pet, but also the loss of the grandfather. Did that make it a sad book to read?
Yeah, I cried.
What?
I cried at one point.
What point?
When they were in the helicopter ready to go to the vet, and she stops hearing the wheezing from the cat, and that I just started crying, because I have a cat who's really, really old, and I really like my cat.
Yeah, it's hard when you know they're not going to always be with us.
I cried when she didn't have her synesthesia for a couple of weeks or days. That was very sad to me, and she kind of felt lost.
Well, it's interesting because for most of the book, she doesn't want to be different from anyone else, and then all of a sudden she's mourning the loss of this thing that made her special.
Yeah, that was very interesting, and it kind of tells you don't regret what you're different for.
Have you thought about that, about what makes you different from everybody else you know? What is it about you that nobody else in this room, for example, can do or... Yes?
I really, really like turtles, so whenever I see balloons flying away in the air, I sometimes almost cry.
Wait a minute, what's the connection between turtles and balloons?
When you release a balloon, sometimes it flies to the ocean, and so it will pop over the ocean, and it looks exactly like jellyfish to sea turtles, so they eat that.
So they eat them, and that's not good for them.
I feel like I'm different because I like to play sports, and I like to read, and I like to watch like fantasy movies like The Lord of the Rings, and I like to do a ton of different things, like I like to doodle, but I'm not like focused in one thing. I like to do everything, explore a lot of things.
I'm an Irish dancer. I'm often in one of the higher classes, but I'm one of the younger students, and so that can just be hard because like they're Irish dancers and it's like their passion, but I do it for fun, but I'm starting to take it more seriously.
I also dance, but I do ballet.
Well, I can remember lots and lots of book titles. I can list all the titles of all the books in the Warrior series, and there are a lot of books in the Warrior series.
So you're a major book lover.
Yeah.
And you have a bibliographic kind of mind, it sounds like.
I'm not really sure, but I know what makes like each one of us compared to each other special. I just think it's more of the personality, because you might say like, "Oh, you remind me of my friend. She has like the same personality." It's not really true because there has to be something different that they do.
Well, now, what would happen if the thing that made you special went away?
I would be very bored.
I say technically, you can't make the thing that makes you special go away because everybody is different from one another.
Wendy Mass is certainly a different kind of writer. We asked her why she decided to write about a character with synesthesia. She says inspiration hit at her local library.
I was walking through the stacks and a book literally fell off the shelf and like hit me on the leg. And so I pick it up look for its rightful place on the shelf, because I used to be a library aide in high school at my public library, and you could never leave a book in the wrong place on the shelf. It has to go exactly where it belongs. So while I was looking for where it would go, I just kind of took a look at the cover, and it had this really wacky cover with all these designs kind of flying around somebody's head. And I looked at the title, and it was called The Man Who Tasted Shapes. And I looked down at the book, and I saw that it's a nonfiction book, so it wasn't like fictional story of someone who could taste shapes. So I thought, how is that possible? How would that work? So I just started standing there in the stacks and reading this book about this man who had this condition called synesthesia, which I had never heard of. And it talked about how his senses were kind of mingled in his brain, and how his senses of taste and touch were linked together. So I just thought, I'd been looking for an idea for a novel, kind of waiting for the idea to hit me. And I just felt like I was sort of standing there with a new idea, something to give to a fictional character, a condition I had never heard of before.
The other issue that floats through the book is dealing with the death of an animal. So talk a bit about how that ended up in this particular book.
A few years before I started writing the book, I had, I'd been keeping writers' notebooks for years and years since I was a teenager, writing ideas down, experiences, things like that. And I always recommend that writers do that. And, a few years before I sat down to write Mango, I had lost my cat, Merlin. And it was really sad. I had a really hard time dealing with it. And I just felt like the topic was something that was kind of not written about enough. There was a lot of children's books on it, like younger children's books, picture books, that were wonderful. But at the time I was, out of college, I was older, but it still hit me really hard. And so I just wanted to write about the experience of, losing a pet, but how, but also give kind of ways to get through it, not past it necessarily, but through it. And, to get a new cat when you're ready, or a new pet when you're ready, and how that helps, and how time is really the only thing that helps. And so when I learned that with synesthesia, you kind of lose that sort of connection, those kind of powers, if you will, during a really traumatic time in your life. So it was a nice way to tie together for me a plot line that I wanted. I wanted her to lose that for a while and kind of live without it, and kind of realize how it's been affecting her, and how maybe she has kind of gotten carried away with things.
Did you like the book?
Yes.
I liked it because it was so detailed and it sounded so realistic, like I could picture that happening in real life.
I liked it because it really had a good plot. It seemed really just real. I could just picture myself in Mia's shoes.
I sort of liked it. I read it when I was 6 or 7, and that's when I really liked it. I was very emotional about when her cat died and everything that happened in the end. But now that I'm reading it again, I'm more focused on like the writing, like her style, and it's not me. It's not the kind of writing I like. I like fantasy books more. I read a lot of realistic fiction, and I don't really love that. I like to read things that are distant, because I feel like if I want something to be real, I can just go live my life and be real. But fantasy is just not real, so I can just go into a different world.
It was really interesting.
I liked it, except I didn't like the part where the cat died. I don't think the cat needed to die.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book is Finally. It's the second book in the series from 11 Birthdays.
And who's it by?
Wendy Mass, the same author. I just like how detailed it was, and it seemed so fake, like it would never happen, yet it seemed really real.
My favorite book is probably Moon Over Manifest or 3 Times Lucky. It's really funny, it's a mystery, and I really like mysteries.
I like Shadow and Bone.
I like it because it's very interesting, because it's not just the basic fantasy. It's kind of has a twist with Russian folklore, but it's not like all the way there.
My favorite books are The Invention of Hugo Cabret and Wonder, because, The Invention of Hugo Cabret, because it's just so gorgeous. Like, because of the pictures, I can really see what's happening, and it's very detailed, the pictures, so it's very nice. And then Wonder by R.J. Palacio, it's just, I love how the author just puts everybody in other people's shoes. With having a birth defect is really hard on a lot of people, even in your family, even though you're supposed to be very supportive. I mean, you can't really stop that from being embarrassed of, your brothers or something.
My favorite book is Out of My Mind. It's about a girl who's not able to walk, talk, or really move her arms in any way. I liked the book because it was just really interesting, and even though the author didn't tell it by other people's point of views, you could still guess what they were thinking.
My favorite book is The Evolution of Calpurnia Tate. It's about a girl living in the 1800s, and I found it really interesting because back then women were expected to wear dresses and they couldn't climb trees, but she always had an interest for that sort of thing, and sciences, and women were only expected to cook and clean and look perfect and stuff. It was just really cool to compare that to how now is, because it just feels like now women have a lot more freedom and rights, and I just found it I could easily put myself in her shoes and think about how hard that is.
My favorite book is Walk to Moons by Sharon Creech, and I loved it because it was really funny but also really sad.
My favorite book is pretty much every book in the Warriors series, because Warriors is really, really awesome. And I like them because they're a good length. They don't take me days to read, but they don't take me 10 minutes.
Why do you like this series in particular?
There are lots of books, and it's pretty hard to run out of Warriors books.
Are you a bookaholic? Can't get enough to read? Well, we have lots and lots and lots of book suggestions on our website, bookclubforkids.org. And if you have a favorite book, tell us about it. Send us an email, or even better, record yourself on your mom or dad's smartphone. You go to the voice memo app, give us your first name, the city where you live, the name of the book you love, and why you like it. And then you email the voice memo to bookclubforkidspodcast@gmail.com. That's bookclubforkidspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks this week to Jonathan Jensen, who composed and performed our music, and to our celebrity reader, LA reporter Claudia Piscuta. Thanks as well to Lisa Chavez and the staff at One More Page Bookstore in Arlington, Virginia. And we want to thank our readers, Hannah, Rachel, Sydney, Karina, Annalise, Eva, and Ellie. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe now to Book Club for Kids. The podcast is available on iTunes or SoundCloud, or you can just add us to your favorites playlist on Stitcher and you will never miss an episode. And if you like the show, please take a moment and give us a rating or a review on iTunes. And help us grow the show by telling your favorite middle school teacher, librarian, or parent about the Book Club for Kids podcast. I'm Kitty Feldy. Thanks again for listening.